All right, we're back, ready to go to continue in chapter 3, and we'll probably be able to finish it in this segment, okay? So we're at the part where it says pseudo faith. There are grandmas, and then there are meemaws. I, Josh, had a meemaw. As a boy, I went to her house often. Special moments were Sundays after church when my family got together and turned the peaceful ambiance of her home into playful chaos. My sister and I wrestled and nitpicked. Dad and I whipped each other with the wet towels we had used to dry the dishes. The real fun was seeing who would end up with the bright orange special 99-cent sticker from the chip bag on his back. And after lunch, we napped, played cards, or watched football. I lived every kid's dream of being loved. Sounds nice. Meemaw, she personified love. She did anything to help my sister and me mature into respectful adults. We spent many nights over at her house cooking, creating, and playing with homemade toys, romping around in the huge sand piles situated at the block company next to her home. She taught me that to have little was just enough, and then she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Because I wanted Meemaw to live longer, I walked a fine line between denial and faith, denying the permanence of the disease on the one hand and blaming it on my faith in God to heal her on the other. Basically, I had to ask myself, was I saying I had faith in God to heal her as a way of denying how real and terminal the cancer actually was? In my mind, I believed. Yet in my heart, I'm not sure how much I did. I know I wanted to, and I told others I believed, particularly my family. They looked to me for the answers. Saying I had faith at least made me appear emotionally healthy and spiritually strong. I think it was my way of talking myself into believing. But deep down, I was struggling, and nobody knew it but me. I couldn't blame God because the church tells me it's wrong to do that, but I did it anyway. This surely isn't God's fault, I told myself. Why would God take the one person who holds our family together? Why does a woman as faithful and loving as Meemaw have to suffer like this? I didn't understand. Meemaw was by far one of the closest people I trusted in life. Why would God allow this to happen? It's the age-old question. The Bible talks about a man named Job who asked it a lot. A wealthy man, he lost everything he owned, including all 7 children, his health, his job, and his livelihood. Even his wife turned on him. Jesus asked it just before breathing his last breath on the cross. He said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" That's found in Mark 15:34. You can King James Version. When we find ourselves stuck in the gap between the way we think life ought to be and the way it really is, it's easy to doubt God's presence in our lives. He feels distant. We feel alone. Even Jesus felt forsaken. Remember his words on the cross? In the Greek text, the word forsaken literally means that Jesus felt abandoned by his Father, yet he called out to him in his pain. Well, we do the same. We feel abandoned, and then we question God's purpose, his plan, even his character. One of the biggest challenges I faced in my time with Meemaw in her last days was her understanding of suffering. Her ability to place her well-being in the hands of someone else she could trust and who she thought acted in her best interest challenged my own faith. Faith, I learned, is my ability to trust my well-being to the care of another who I believe has my best interest at heart. Although Meemaw was the one suffering, I was questioning, do I really trust God is looking out for me? When we trust God for heaven, but not for our daily lives, we walk around with a pseudo-faith. Faith a mile wide and an inch deep. We live in denial and maintain a false intimacy with God. We say he is there for us, and to some degree we believe he's looking out for us as long as all is well. But when we hit a crisis, our religious behaviors and super spiritual cliches are usually not enough to get us through the fire. It's easy to believe God to be the God of the universe, but not so easy to believe that God could be the God of my life today. Gypsy Smith said there are 5 Gospels of Jesus Christ: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and you, the Christian. Most people will never read the first 4. Okay, the next section. Hurting, questioning, searching, yet hoping. So let's go back. Can we trust God for today? In the here and now, realities of life or our unanswered prayers vainly cast into nothing more than time plus chance spinning randomly in a purposeless existence. Will God protect my son on the baseball field so that he doesn't get hit with a line drive baseball in the head? Is God that big that he cares for the small but important details of my one life? Could it be that he is as much the God of my father as he is the God of the Falls Church Little League team, as he is the God of the nations, even as he is the God of the entire universe? What's funny is how we all look for ways to bargain with God to see if he actually exists and cares about our everyday life. When Tim, was younger, my mother made me take piano lessons. Whether it was a lack of skill or just my rebellion, I really learned only 2 songs. Perhaps it was because I spent most of my time playing only those 2 songs. I remember believing that if I could play them both flawlessly, that God would heal my sister Candy of her brain injury. So I went home nearly every day. I sat down at a piano and I played the songs. Perhaps trying to earn my sister's healing was my way of bargaining with God. You know, Gideon in the Bible did something very similar. He asked God to prove his guidance. Laying a wool fleece out overnight, he challenged God. If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said. Not only did God do it for Gideon once, he did it twice. How often are we like Gideon, putting out fleeces to God, looking for him to show up in our marriages, relationships, our poor health issues, our jobs, and seeking to know his will and his way for our lives? Prove yourself, God, and your method to me. You start asking yourself and wondering, and this is the challenge of faith. Where does God come alive, and how do I trust him for my present circumstances and my future, versus where do I own personal responsibility for myself? The psychology of meaning. If there is any one story that describes the heroism, if you will, of taking personal responsibility in the depths of mere hopelessness, disappointment, and literal hell on earth, it is that of Viktor Frankl. A well-known Viennese psychiatrist, Frankl survived the Nazi death camp at Auschwitz. Choosing to give up a visa to the United States in preference for staying in Germany and caring for his parents, Frankl, along with his wife, father, mother, and brother, were all arrested and put in a concentration camp at Theresienstadt. I did not say that very well. In 1942. Only he and his sister Stella would survive. Studying under the tutelage of Sigmund Freud, Frankl understood behavior from a deterministic mindset. That is, in such hellish environments such as a death camp, every individual would be determined to become like a groveling animal. But that wasn't the case. What Frankl discovered in his quest for survival as prisoner number 100,019-104 was that a few brave souls would rise to the occasion to comfort, love, and share their already insubstantial rations with others who needed them. He would later say that in all classes, ethnicities, and groups, only 2 races of people existed: decent and unprincipled. Frankl stayed alive because he chose to grow deeper and accept the suffering he had to endure. Of all he had stripped away from him, even to the point of pure nakedness, Frankl realized that the only thing that could not be taken from him was his will to live, his attitude, and his spiritual freedom. Frankl quoted Nietzsche to describe the only explanation how he could endure to the very end. He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. As you think about your own personal why to live, for in the midst of your disappointments and crisis, consider the prisoner that Frankl described who gave up faith in the future and also lost his inward embrace of spiritual freedom. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl tells the story of a man who had a dream in February 1945 that the war for him would be over on March 30th. The prisoner was happy and full of expectation, But as time grew near, news of the war increased, and the man began to lose the hope he had been clinging to. His physical and mental state rapidly declined, and on March 30th, he lost all consciousness. He died March 31st, 1945, from what appeared to be typhus, but Frankl knew he had died of a broken heart. The war for him was indeed over on March 30th. When we lose hope and the why to live for, at best, we resign to mediocrity. At worst, we succumb to suicide. Frankl used to ask many of his patients at the outset of therapy, "Why do you not commit suicide?" And based on the client's answers, he would then create a framework to help the client understand his meaning to live. But as Frankl admitted, many of us do not come to an awareness of what we have to offer because we do not look to the spiritual things. As Frankl asks, the consciousness of one's inner value is anchored in higher, more spiritual things and cannot be shaken by camp life. But how many free men, let alone prisoners, possess it? Do we? The seeking system. Viktor Frankl understood the search for meaning to be the primary motivational force in man. Dallas Willard agrees. Meaning is not a luxury for us. It is a kind of spiritual oxygen, we might say, that enables our souls to live. As we have shown, this spiritual longing, this discontent or existential struggle, if you will, for purpose, meaning, and making sense of who God is in the disappointments of life, is as intrinsic to our souls as the longing for air. Blaise Pascal described it as a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man. As we mentioned earlier in the chapter, the search for meaning is now becoming empirically valid. New research described in the neurobiological and psychological literature is now suggesting that we have a seeking system, that is, experienced as restlessness, longing, or an unformed need state, a thirsting for God, and is both a conscious and an unconscious process that has roots in development, leading to an object-seeking relationship with a transcendent one. Jonathan Haidt, professor of social psychology at the University of Virginia, has studied moral emotions, in particular the awe and wonder that's felt when we experience a spiritual high. If you will, a sense of the transcendent. Haidt concludes that these spiritual feelings lie in each one of us as relatively hardwired pre-cultural sets of responses built into the central and peripheral nervous system of the human species. The idea that this longing for something beyond ourselves is born in each of us is called naturalistic spirituality and has been studied and supported in other research. In one particular study, researchers found support for these innate responses after interviewing children who had no connection with any religious institution and had not yet been socialized into secular ways of interpreting reality. Sit up here. The children in this study were essentially unbiased toward any belief system. And what researchers found is extraordinary, that a relational consciousness was linked to these children's spiritual experience. That is, the desire and longing to reach for a relationship with a transcendent one exists in each one of us. So much that the scientific discovery of an intrinsic relational nature when it comes to spirituality has even been found in children as young as 3 years of age. Perhaps this is what Solomon meant when he wrote that God has also set eternity in our hearts. And you can find that in Ecclesiastes 3:11. We discuss more about the seeking system and how it functions shortly. For now, it's important for each of us to realize that the longing we have for a relationship with God comes from God and has been developing in us since the day we were born. As a result, the longing and journey toward intimately knowing God is not too far out of reach, especially in the midst of life's disappointments. Last section, you will make a choice. Every one of us is going to be disappointed. Every one of us is going to come to a point in our lives where we're lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering why life isn't turning out the way we thought it would. Doubting if God cares, yet hoping he does. This wondering, searching, and seeking is innate. We may not see the need to believe unless it intersects with our emotional needs. But the reality is this: there will come a day and a time when each of us will face an emotional crisis, possibly death, and we will have to decide if God is truly important to us or not. From the time the psychology of God was first studied until now, researchers have emphasized the importance of the intense emotional experiences that precede, characterize, and accompany some religious conversion experiences. Studies show that as many as 80% of us who make a religious conversion to knowing and believing in God do so after experiencing a period of emotional crisis, particularly relational distresses such as divorce, bereavement, and relationship problems. Thus, as it appears in the psychological research, we all look for ways to manage, maintain, and regulate our emotions in times of relational abandonment and loneliness, and we often turn to the divine for safety. As recent neurobiological research shows, a variety of psychological processes are fundamental involved in the spiritual experience. These processes are founded on conscious and unconscious strivings and on the inherent human need for a relationship with God. As Os Guinness said, the important thing is not the distinction between believers and unbelievers. The vital divide is between those who care enough to think seriously about life and those who are indifferent. The capacity to choose to think about the existence of God is therefore left up to each individual. Just like neurobiological factors, psychological factors alone are not causal chains leading to unthinking, deterministic processes, but function in the context of human beings' capacity to make choices and impose these choices on the world, including on their relationship with God. What these researchers are saying is that at some point in your life, whether you think seriously about it now or not, you will face your need for something more, your need for a relationship with God. And whether you choose or don't choose to believe, and what you decide or don't decide to do with it is totally up to you. But the bottom line is this: you will have to make a choice that will lead you in only one of two ways, either toward God or away from him. We'll look at both avenues. So we're at the end of chapter 3, and their consider this point is that every day you make a choice about God one way or another, and life will get your attention. It always has. It has a way of constantly bringing you back to the question of who he is in your life. And the question is, are you taking him seriously or are you indifferent? God desires a relationship with you. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. That's a scripture from the Bible. Call on him and take him seriously while he is yet near. Well, the next question is, what does it mean to take God seriously? And so we'll get into that in the next section, which is part 2, how relationship changes everything. So again, some pretty serious content here. It definitely gives us something to ponder and think about. And I want to say that if you have questions, are you just, I don't know, maybe you need someone to pray with you or you need someone to process. I'm happy and I'm willing to be a person to do that with you. Especially now, I'm offered free mini sessions to individuals. We're able to do Zoom, do teletherapy. So if you're just, you need someone to connect with, you need some support, I'm happy to be there. And, I do the medical, I do the psychology, I do the life coaching, and then I do the spirituality. And I understand that not everybody is in a place where they're searching for spirituality, and that's okay. There's still room for those other elements. So I just want to encourage you and just bless you and encourage you to know that you're strong and that you're loved and you're wanted. And want you to come back for the next section so we can continue in reading about this information. Thank you so much.